Welcome to Fundraise Now. My name is Alex Simon, and this is my interview with Teddy Schleifer, one of the 2 or 3 journalists covering billionaires, and specifically their philanthropy, if I can get this right. And when I say philanthropy, I mean not just the money to necessarily nonprofits, but to also political campaigns, impact investing, which is this kind of space where billionaires are giving money to organizations, whether they be nonprofit, for-profit, LLCs, etc., that have some sort of higher good impact for society. Also kind of philanthro capital, in other words, companies that might take carbon out of the air, or that have a greater good, but it's still a private company that makes money. Whether the impact they have on society is always positive remains a question. But philanthropy and that big umbrella that is giving away their money. And a lot of their money is currently parked in foundations, private foundations, family foundations, and donor-advised funds, which we talk about in the interview. He specifically covers the technology space, the new space of which there's so many billionaires. Teddy's out of San Francisco. He's the founding partner of Puck Media, which is launching formally September 2021. Prior to that, he was at Vox's Recode and wrote about billionaires there. And prior to Recode, he was at CNN reporting on the 2016 presidential campaign and the influence of money in that particular race. Hope you enjoy the interview. Like, subscribe, learn. I want to first dig into your background, your kind of why.
Sure.
Why cover billionaires?
So I think there's this is a moment where there's incredible inequality, right? Just as objectively, the inequality is at a 50-year high. In a lot of ways, it's a reminder of the inequality that we saw, in the 1880s or the 1910s, right, of the first Gilded Age. And I think that, if you were covering, the first Industrial Revolution without covering inequality, you were kind of missing the story or missing one of the stories. So I wanted to sort of write more about not just kind of inequality from the lens of here's what it's like to be poor in America, but here's what it's like to be rich in America. Here's what you think about the critique of kind of inequality. Here's how you structure your political giving. Here's how you structure your philanthropic giving. Here's what a family office looks like if you're really that wealthy. Here's how you think about taxes and kind of your obligations to the public sector. And there's not a ton of reporting on this. It's easier to cover inequality through the lens of the poor because you kind of have access to the people. It's not easy, but it's easier, I would argue. You know who the losers of inequality are, and you can generally, with a little bit of legwork, find them. I think there's kind of a dearth of coverage of inequality through the lens of the rich. So I came to this because I used to be a reporter who specialized in covering political money and covering kind of billionaires' influence in the political system, reading through FEC reports, IRS reports, understanding kind of the donor world. I was at CNN during the 2016 campaign cycle, which was sort of peak big donor. You had people like Sheldon Adelson and Charles Koch and Tom Steyer and Mike Bloomberg, who were playing huge roles in the American political system. And then I moved out to San Francisco right after that campaign in mid-2017 to sort of begin writing about the bigger story, which isn't just about their political spending, but about their kind of billions of dollars and how it's spent in fields outside of politics and things like philanthropy. And that a lot of listeners know well. These are kind of the big fish of this world. So I think it's a fascinating beat. I think more people should be covering it, even though that would be bad for me personally. But come on in.
So you're not anti-billionaire. You're not. You don't think, like I think we were talking about before we recorded, is Anand Girhadadas said that he doesn't think billionaires should exist. I don't think that that's probably your position. You're kind of much more, I feel like, reporting about their spending, what they're doing, and letting your audience judge whether it's right or wrong or what have you. So what's your position, I guess, on covering the beat, and what do you think about it? Should things change? Should things not change? Where are you at?
I think that's a fair read on kind of where I see my role in the process here. Obviously, there's a vigorous public debate, from Elizabeth Warren to Leon Cooperman about whether or not billionaires should exist. Are these good people? Is the system fair? Where I see my role is I think that a lot of the debate is driven by press releases, prior beliefs, unfounded suspicions, anecdote. And I think a lot of the debate is there's not much debate really. There's sort of two clear tribal camps, and I don't think there's a tremendous amount of nuance in the public conversation. And I see my role as a journalist is not necessarily to say who's winning, and who's right, but to give the public better information so that we can have like a more informed debate about this stuff. I think lots of the interesting questions, to me at least, are in the gray zone. As often, any interesting debate really is about what happens in the gray zone, right? There are certainly instances where I think the argument for billionaire philanthropy is stronger. I think there are times when the argument is weaker. I just finished reading Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe about the Sacklers. Like, I think it's pretty hard to defend, the Sackler billionaire empire, right? Then there's obviously people like Bill Gates, right, who are, I think the last year have shown can play pivotal roles in kind of making up for government failure. Like, those are sort of like the easy questions. I feel like the hard questions are about, things like climate change, right, where you have lots of wealthy people who earnestly appear to, want to help solve climate change. But on the other hand, lots of the capitalist system has contributed to climate change, right? What should the obligations be of kind of the current generation of wealthy individuals? Is it their responsibility to make up for a prior generation? Can they do things differently? That to me is kind of the fun stuff, the things without easy answers. So I see my job as trying to bring more facts to the fore, trying to bring more scrutiny on these people, not necessarily scrutiny in like a negative sense, like as a scrutiny as a critique, but just blocking and tackling journalism about what the hell is happening in this system, which is hard. This stuff is hard. And, I think lots of listeners who are raising money from these people probably have the same experience that I do, which is there's no email address, there's no website, that's sort of the point. It's not sometimes in my moments where I'm feeling bad at my job, I have to remind myself that the opacity is not, that's by design, right? The point is to be hard to reach. The point is to be difficult. The point is to be inscrutable. That's the system working. That's, in Silicon Valley speak, that's the feature, not the flaw, or whatever the quote is that people say out here. So that's important for me to keep in mind. And I'm sure that may be comforting to some development officers to hear that even people who can kind of brandish a high horse and say they have a right to know often are left wanting. Alex, I can't hear you. Sorry. I think you're on mute.
That was interesting. I think, and we're going to get into your most recent article.
Sure.
Do you think that there is a miscommunication in terms of their resources and then what the resources can provide? Is there because they are so difficult to reach and they're running empires in many respects, are they out of touch in a way, and can communication barriers be broken down to reach them? You know a couple of billionaires, I think,
Sure.
from doing your research, and you're in those circles, you follow those circles. Is it just kind of like, look, I've got a lot of people that are asking me for money, and I don't know what the correct place to invest in. And that's how they look at it. It's investment. And so is it kind of like, is it communication? Is that something that can be broken down, or kind of what's your take on, because there is so much, again, we'll get into your article on DAFs, donor advised funds, which my industry is extremely familiar with, but there's so much there, and that's just DAFs. That's not including other areas of money. So yeah, how can those wells start to open, so to speak? And are we not doing a good job communicating to them?
I think the unfortunate answer, and which is not what people want to hear, but I think it's the truth, is that I think there's no interest in that from wealthy people. I think the whole reason why. Okay, let's take the idea of a website, right? Which obviously lots of wealthy people in Silicon Valley could build a website for their foundations if they wanted to. It's not I assure you, it is not a technical challenge. It is not something they haven't thought about. The reason why they don't have a website or an email address, and I'm obviously overgeneralizing here. There are tons of charitable foundations that have websites, to be clear. But for the ones who do not, let's take Larry Page's foundation, which is something I've written about a bit. Larry Page is, I think, now the 6th or 7th wealthiest person in the world, has a foundation with several $1 billion in assets. It's called the Carl Victor Page Memorial Page. It has no website. It has no public staff. Even the people who work there, I do not think have ever given an interview ever. No email. Why is that the case? Is it like a communication problem? I think that's honestly giving your side of the table, Alex, too much blame. I think it's intentional that there's is because they don't want to be flooded with kind of what they see as crap, right? They want to maintain, high level access to the deals that they want. I say deals in quotation marks, but I think it does have some similarity to kind of Silicon Valley deal making, where they're interested in having, relationships with prestige nonprofits, and they don't really need a website for that. I think they would see a lot of the inbound that comes in as low grade, crap. And if they want to get in touch with Tony Blair to fund, the Tony Blair Institute, or they want to get in touch with Harvard, they can get in touch with Harvard. They don't need to have, info at Larry Page Foundation to get in touch with Harvard, or Stanford or whatnot. So this is a relationship business. And I think lots of high level donors don't really have an interest in improving communication with the nonprofit industry. That's just the reality. So I know that's a pessimistic take, but it's kind of where I'm at.
And that's fair. Let me ask you this question so a lot of my peers are hearing like the phrase impact investing.
Sure.
And that's new to them. They're like, what is impact investing? What is the, and it's specifically true with like, they call next gen, a lot of family offices call it next gen.
Yeah.
Donors. So that means like, young adults in generational wealth, getting access to and resources to and more say over the money that's involved. So just define for the audience, what is impact investing? Is that blurring with the just charity and giving back?
Sure. So You're correct. There is obviously impact investing is very faddish right now. It's very, very trendy. You're right that a lot of that is driven by not just like the external critique of kind of billionaires, but also, yes, there's like a generational issue at play here. I mean, I've talked with people who are related to kind of the patriarchs or matriarchs of kind of fortunes, and the younger generation sees things differently, and I think they feel understandable political pressure, not from the outside, but from the inside. And I think that makes a big impact. What is impact investing? I think it depends who you ask. I think the idea is, look, if there's, $50 billion that is sitting in an endowment somewhere, or sitting in, a corpus as part of a foundation, or even as part of a family office, to solely focus on kind of the nonprofit 501c3 giving, which might be 5 billion of that $100 billion fortune, sort of misses the biggest impact you can make, which is funding responsible investments in fields like climate change or transportation, or modernizing kind of old industries to make them fit the modern age better. And that can have a pro-social, pro-civic impact, and that's maybe more important than kind of the traditional, big capital C charity work that these people do. Now, obviously, it's not charity, right? It's not philanthropy, at least as kind of most, I think, regular people would narrowly define it. And I think lots of nonprofit critics would say, if you solely focus on impact investing, which again is something that can make you money, I mean, that's what the whole investing part of this of the phrase. It's not necessarily doing the greatest good with your fortune that you could do, and it's certainly not necessarily reducing inequality, because you can get wealthier off of it. I think I don't have a super strong opinion about whether or not impact investing is, a legitimate social purpose or not. But I do think it's important to distinguish like what impact investing is and what it isn't, right? It clearly, you could clearly see a scenario where if you're so focused so exclusively on kind of the charitable side of the house, where you're funding, work to address climate change while taking your corpus and investing in an ExxonMobil, that clearly would seem to me to be a net negative for the world. Now, at the same time, if you're solely focused on, what you're doing with the corpus, that you're not really thinking about the nonprofit industry, you're also sort of missing the point. So, I'm not a huge critic of impact investing. I just want to kind of call things as they are.
Let's talk about DAFs.
Sure.
In your latest piece, you did an awesome job breaking down kind of the history of DAFs and the current proposed changes with DAF.
Yep.
Talk about Ray Madoff,
Sure.
John Arnold, DAFs, and your latest newsletter for the Stratosphere.
Sure. So folks may know Ray Madoff, or at the least they know the critique that Ray has kind of pioneered over the last decade. For major gift officers or people who raise money, they know that they get a contribution from a donor-advised fund on the regular. In fact, one of the funny things, I didn't say this in the piece, but it's funny to me that lots of times things that are called foundations really aren't actually foundations. Like you can call your philanthropy whatever you want, right? Like something will be called the blah 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 foundation, but then you'll look it up and you'll see there's no 990 because it's actually a DAF, and I've seen that happen here in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I think when I met, I first found you. You were in a Clubhouse room, and I think you were talking about the Zuckerbergs.
Yes.
And I raised my hand and came to the stage in the Clubhouse room, and I said, I just found out that the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative isn't a 501c3.
It's an LLC.
Absolutely. It's an LLC. So that makes me think that and that is part of I think the Silicon Valley culture, which you're in or covering, is so kind of game changing for our industry as nonprofit leaders that used to look at it as charity. It is an investment, like whether it be we're solving childhood hunger or we're educating students. They want, and this is true of all donors, whether they be small donors or big donors, they're interested in a return on the investment.
Yeah.
That investment, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like you were saying with impact investing, where it's like an actual company that may be doing something that's for the greater good, but it can be a traditional charity, but they're solving the charity solving a problem, and you have to kind of show data behind all that. I mean, these are all data-driven people that I think really look at metrics. That's how they grew these companies. That's how one of the ways they became so wealthy. So, but yeah, please go ahead.
I think the more generous. Obviously, I'm overgeneralizing here like crazy, right? I'm just describing tons of people through like single sentences. But if people will indulge me in that, I think the more generous interpretation for why folks have flocked, at least LLCs specifically, is that they found lots of solutions to social problems to not be through nonprofits. And if you have a 501c3, you, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, someone out there, I believe you cannot give money to for-profit companies, or maybe there's some rules governing how much of that you can do. So if you want to tackle education, right, and you believe that educational technology is a key part of how you'll solve education, which is, for instance, a key part of the Zuckerberg initiative's thinking revolves around technology. You are hamstrung if you use a traditional family foundation. So I don't think it's necessarily always about making money. I think that's actually one of the critiques offered by the left that I don't think is accurate. I do not think that Mark Zuckerberg is out there saying, I'm trying to make money through the Chan Zuckerberg initiative. I do think that it does happen sometimes because you're investing in for-profit companies, and sometimes it leads to you making money. But I don't necessarily subscribe to the belief. I don't think my reporting has shown that that's really what's driving them. Jumping back to DAFs, just to finish the story there. So for folks who raise money through DAFs, they're everywhere. 1 out of every $8 set aside for charity is now in a DAF. $140 billion. It's gone gangbusters over the last 5 years, in part because rich people flock to DAFs, in part because the money that's in DAFs is invested in the stock market, and the stock market's doing it hot, so that money gets bigger. Also, in part because DAFs are easy. You don't have to be, my focus is on billionaire philanthropy. But if you're just a millionaire, right, just a regular old rich guy who's not a billionaire, you don't want to set up a big charitable foundation. It doesn't really make sense financially. It's a ton of work to manage. So what you do is you set up a DAF, right? You can set up a DAF that has $5,000 in it. I think the average DAF size is somewhere around like $200K. So there are plenty of like regular people, upper middle class people, who have used DAFs to kind of smooth out lumpy years in their personal income. So if you sell a company, you have $20 million that comes into your bank account. You want to give a lot of that away because you don't want to pay all of it to the U.S. Treasury. It's part of taxes. So you find something to fund, and it's easier to find something to fund if you have longer time horizon, right? So if you can put the 20 million into a DAF, figure it out over the next decade or two, it makes sense. And I'm not really like a strong critic of that either. I think it makes sense for a lot of people. Now, so what Ray Madoff and John Arnold are concerned about. Ray Madoff is a professor at Boston College Law School, has been a leading academic critic of this forever. John Arnold is a newcomer to this debate, but he is a Houston hedge fund billionaire who has a DAF himself. They have sort of teamed up in a unlikely alliance to take on the DAF industry. They both want to impose some timelines and some deadlines for when this money is dispersed. So there's $140 billion there. If you're a DAF holder who has $1 billion in a DAF, unlike a private foundation, you do not have to give that money away ever. You could probably pass it down to an heir if you really wanted to. So there's some concern that you are building a tax shelter that is money set aside for charity and is irrevocably set aside for charity. But the whole reason that there's a payout requirement at foundations is to make sure the money actually gets to nonprofits, right? That's the whole point of this. So they are the brains and brawn behind a new bill in Congress sponsored by Angus King of Maine and Chuck Grassley of Iowa to impose new requirements. And we wrote about it in my newsletter, The Stratosphere, which people should subscribe to at thestratosphere.news. If I have not plugged it already, I'll do that again right now. Actually, I played a small role in the backstory to this. Is I published an interview with John Arnold, who I've known a little bit since I started my career in Houston a while back. I published an interview, and I think in mid 2019 with John, where he was kind of railing on the DAF industry, and it was interesting because he's a rich guy, right, who is advantaged by these rules, who is sort of being a traitor to his class, and asking Congress to impose more requirements on people like him. So it's an interesting story for sure. Ray Madoff, sitting in Boston, doesn't know John Arnold at all. She's like, oh man, suddenly there's this like high-powered kind of funny critic who is saying the same things I've been saying for a decade. And Ray had been not toiling in obscurity per se, but she was clearly, in my opinion at least, losing the debate, right? She may have been right on the merits or not right on the merits or whatever, but clearly the momentum was with
she felt like she was barking at the moon, maybe.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, as I said, more and more people are flocking to these things. $140 billion is there. Ray was influential in the academic community, but I don't mean this as an insult. I don't think she was influencing the public debate just based on the merits and the facts, so that more and more people are flocking to them. So then Arnold jumps in, and now the two of them. So Arnold starts making this commentary public. Ray emails me, reads my article, and says, "Who's this John Arnold guy? Can we meet? Can I meet John Arnold?" Eventually, she links up with John Arnold, and 2 years later, they have a bill before Congress that, like, I'm not an expert on kind of Capitol Hill, but this could become law. And I think it's to some ways a testament of, you say something long enough, people start to listen. So
that's true. It's bipartisan sponsored. Is that correct?
Yeah. Angus King is,
and it's two somewhat centrists. Ish.
Old white guys. Old white guys. Certainly not we began this conversation talking about the billionaire philanthropy critique.
Right.
It's interesting to me that the billionaire philanthropy critique, the first, in my opinion, like policy manifestation of that critique, is not coming from the Elizabeth Warrens of the world or the Bernie Sanders of the world or the AOCs of the world. It's not some plan to like abolish billionaires or a wealth tax or things that are in vogue on the kind of the far left wing of the party. It's like a very kind of boring, unsexy, wonky attack on like one financial instrument. And like I don't even know if John Arnold even agrees with Ray Madoff on like some of the big picture critique of billionaire. I mean, obviously Arnold is a billionaire. He's a philanthropist. He signed the Giving Pledge. He's like probably fits in at the Chamber of Commerce crowd. Like he's not some class critic. So it's interesting to me that there's this alignment between the Chuck Grassleys of the world, right? Republican, leadership aligned, Washington denizen, been around for forever. There's an alignment between the Chuck Grassleys of the world and like the billionaire shouldn't exist kind of part of the world here.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think John Arnold, this is my guess, I obviously don't know him like you do, likes to break things. Like he's a true entrepreneur. Like he is, money's kind of, you got to invest in it and risk losing it in many ways. So when it's just being stuck in this kind of purgatory, then is that boring? I mean, for an entrepreneur to just kind of, I know it's about making money, but, having it, you've already earmarked it for for a particular purpose, but then it's just not being released to charities. So so I think it is interesting, and I love the phrase you used in there. They're interesting bedfellows.
Yeah,
you know, they're not. Yeah,
I mean, Arnold is not. I think Arnold is attracted to stuff where he can kind of poke the bear. He had this in his Twitter bio until recently. I asked him why he removed it, but he used to say, he was a equal opportunity special interest pot stirrer. I think I think he has lots of kind of interesting critiques of what he perceives as special interests. So in this case, he's aligned with the left, right? Because he's kind of going after big philanthropy. But he's also a huge critic and funder of critiques of public sector unions, right? So that he's seen as there's a headline from him that he calls Arnold the most hated man in pension land, right? So clearly there are people on the left who would find Arnold to be anti-worker, anti-labor, conservative Coke industry type person, right? So clearly he is not easy to pin down ideologically, but that's what makes him interesting to me.
My colleagues, I just wanted to so if that proposed change went through, I think there's so much that we do as nonprofit leaders that we would actually what a lot of upper echelon nonprofits do, let's say a college or a university or a really strong community foundation, is they actually use that use tools, financial planning instruments, and they say, hey, set up a DAF with us. And they get the resources. They're able to manage those resources and in turn make that institution stronger.
Yeah.
So I think it would be interesting. I bet you there's a ton of debate in my industry about whether spending that DAF money is a good thing or not, or as quickly as it could be, and what that looks like.
Yeah.
So I just think that's interesting. And then you touched on the Sacklers. I just wanted to touch on them as well.
Sure.
Obviously, first of all, who are they? They were and I will talk about their charity, and then talk about kind of the impact and fallout that's been happening from their charity.
Sure. I have not covered the Sacklers extensively myself, but obviously, they are, I guess, an exemplar of kind of how private philanthropy can obscure kind of the conversation about any family's impact on the world. So the Sacklers, for a long time, at least in Patrick Radden-Keefe's retelling, were just seen as kind of these, pharmaceutical pioneers who funded amazing art collections all around the world, right? And until recently, we hadn't really reckoned with kind of the scale of the opioid crisis and the role that the Sackler family, the same people who, you saw their name adorned on a wall at the Met, were the same people who were leading to, millions of people getting addicted to drugs very far away from, the Upper East Side of Manhattan. So the Sacklers have become a great example of kind of how private philanthropy is not the whole story. And that's something that I believe definitely is that if you're thinking about any person's impact on the world, focusing solely on the philanthropy misses the point. And I think you do need to have a broader view of impact on the world. Because if you just looked at the Sacklers' philanthropic giving, you'd think, oh, these are great people, right? Now, obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning, the Sacklers are an easy target to some extent. But I do think what we've seen over the last couple of years probably terrifies some people who sort of assumed that they could use philanthropy to to win, to basically convince the public that they were quote unquote good people. I mean, we've seen in the aftermath of kind of federal lawsuits and disclosures about just the scale of the opioid crisis, the Sackler name has become an albatross, right? We've seen lots of cultural institutions around the globe take down the Sackler name. Obviously, the Sacklers are now in court sort of with each other and with the government and Purdue Pharma. So there's who knows where the story is going to end, but I don't know. Maybe who knows? Maybe the Sacklers will find some way to kind of weasel out of it like they have for decades. And but I do think that it has permanently shifted the conversation about philanthropy in a way that feels to me more honest and a better reflection of kind of people's impact on the world.
We're doing Teddy lightning round. So one of the things I think a lot of my colleagues are more geeked out about is the McKinsey Scott donations that have been happening recently.
Sure.
What's your take on McKinsey Scott? And also
lightning round though. I'll do it fast.
Okay.
I think McKinsey is has proven that a gospel of the charitable movement has been fake, which is that it's impossible to move this money quickly. Clearly, if one person can do it, other people can do it. She has basically no support staff. So overall, I am, as amazed by the McKinsey story as everybody else is. Because I'm a reporter to play contrarian, I think there are two things that I think that the conventional wisdom has gotten wrong. One, I do think it remains possible that we could find out in 5 years that the McKinsey money went out too quickly and that there was kind of value to the bureaucracy. So I think some of the media hoopla has gotten a little bit over its skis, in my opinion. And two, everyone loves McKinsey for being so transparent. Remember that it's transparency on her terms. She uses a DAF. She makes these disclosures on Medium whenever she wants to. She doesn't release amounts that she gives to charities. That's totally up to whether or not the nonprofit wants to or not. So I think the transparency question. Basically, I'm overall very impressed by McKinsey, but I do think that there are two things that should be more put into a little bit more context.
Jack Dorsey and his Google spreadsheet.
Jack is sort of a mini McKinsey to some extent. He started doing this around the same time during COVID. But what's interesting to me about Jack is, unlike McKinsey, he gives a little bit more information on the assets that he actually has in the DAF. And it's interesting to me. I mean, Jack Dorsey is 3 times as wealthy as he was 2 years ago. So when he set aside, a quarter of his equity in Square for his donor advised fund, and he said it was $1 billion. I haven't checked recently, but it's not $1 billion now. It's like maybe 3. So even though Jack is trying to give all his money away, he is failing because he's making more money, which is just kind of a function of the stock market and a function of how Square has become so omnipresent. But I'm always.
I think the website even shows the money distributed and the money in the account, and every time you check it, the money goes up.
Yeah.
And they're still giving that team. I assume he's got people that validate the charities. They're giving money away. So I think it's interesting. Okay, we talked a little bit about the Zuckerbergs. Did you want to expand anything on that?
I don't know. I mean, I think the CZI is very interesting. I've written a bit last year, and I still remain kind of interested in the tensions between CZI and Facebook. I think we talked about someone like Arnold at the beginning of this, and sort of the tensions between the charitable enterprise and the corporate enterprise. I think CZI is a great example where I've reported on these tensions where people at CZI sometimes have trouble working for Mark Zuckerberg, which they do. Mark Zuckerberg is the co-CEO of CZI because they look at where the money's coming from at a place like Facebook, and a lot of the people who work at CZI are abhorred or see Facebook's work as abhorrent. So I think CZI is obviously they do some work that's super interesting on housing policy, on criminal justice reform, on education. One of the most interesting questions to me is about that tension between Facebook and CZI.
All right, let's do a 2-for-1. The two gentlemen that are so involved with space.
Sure.
Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos.
Interesting to me, both for different reasons.
Right.
Bezos obviously is a latecomer to the world of kind of mega charitable giving. He for a long time he's doing a lot very quickly, and I guess that's similar to with Elon, which I can talk about in a second. I mean, Bezos, has set aside $10 billion for climate philanthropy, which is, I think, by far the biggest climate-specific charitable project. I do think the Bezos Earth Fund is going to remake that sector. Not remake the American climate change response or the world's climate change response, but certainly remake the philanthropic sector. We've seen Bezos, even in the first 6 months, he's hiring the CEOs of other big foundations. He hired the head of ClimateWorks, and he hired the head of the World Resources Institute. So even just in the personnel, he's reshaping the industry already. Elon is interesting. He obviously, we're talking a second ago about Jack Dorsey. Elon has gotten so much wealthier over the last year because Tesla is just like going gangbusters. Elon also has not done a ton of charitable giving. He has said, that he doesn't want to focus on it till later in life. I think he's given away a couple $100 million. He set aside $100 million earlier this year for this prize focused on kind of decarbonization of the economy. But Elon is somebody who obviously he doesn't want to sell his shares in Tesla. Like, Elon is so illiquid. I guess he could be liquid tomorrow, but you know how people are with Tesla. Like, Elon sells a single share, I'm sure the company will explode purely based on people on Twitter going apoplectic. So Elon can't really sell, or thinks he can't really sell. But he's very interesting to me. I mean, he's someone who definitely believes in private enterprise.
Yes.
He thinks that Tesla and SpaceX do have this public mission, to save the world from climate change or to create a backup option if Earth implodes.
Yes.
So he has interesting views on kind of on what the role of philanthropy should be too.
All right, Gates. It's hard not to talk about them without thinking about the divorce.
Sure.
And the impact that had with obviously the Scott and Bezos marriage. So yeah. Gates.
How do I do this quickly? I mean, look, table stakes here. I mean, what happens to the Gates Foundation is extremely important for the public. It's the biggest charity in the world. Obviously, they have enormous debate, enormous influence, not just in the US, but like around the world. Like, if you're, it's not uncommon if, some foreign government is deciding what to do on a public health matter, where there will be, government leaders, healthcare leaders, and then like the Gates Foundation. That's like not unheard of, which speaks to their influence. I think Gates is a great example of kind of billionaire philanthropy gone right, especially over the last year. But obviously the divorce also shows their tremendous power, right? Like, two things can be true to me at once. A, billionaires could be doing good for the world at some times, and they can have tremendous power that reflects, oligarchic tendencies of the economy. And that's kind of where I think I am on Gates, which is he's done a lot of good for the world, but he also has enormous influence that is not really democratic. And I think any fair-minded analyst of the scene would have to admit both those things.
Last one is Thiel. You had a
Sure.
couple of interesting tweets, I believe, about Thiel's.
A couple interesting tweets. Put it on my gravestone.
I think about his IRA, Roth IRA, which was,
Sure.
I remember being a young boy and my father saying, invest in a Roth IRA because it's tax-free when you
Did you do it, Alex?
withdraw.
Did you do it?
I have one, but not
There
to
you
the
go.
degree that Mr. Thiel has figured out to his credit. To his credit. How to expand and grow so rapidly. So just talk about Thiel, your 2 cents on him, and then the Roth.
Sure. I mean, so Thiel is somebody who thinks that the U.S. tax system is fundamentally confiscatory, and people were dunking on Thiel for pulling so much money into this Roth IRA. Basically, to make the long story short, as part of the ProPublica leaks on people's tax filings, they deduced that Thiel had, I think, amassed $5 billion in a Roth IRA, which is, as Alex knows, or anyone with an IRA knows, is heavily tax advantaged. People are dunking on Thiel for taking this money out of the tax system. I don't think Thiel thought that was a bad article at all. I think it shows he was smart, according to him. Because if you think the system is corrupt, successfully finding out a way to get around it is a pat on the back. I'm sure Thiel did not love having his tax returns leaked, presumably by some IRS employee, but it probably showed him to be smart. I mean, Thiel is a fascinating character. There's a whole book coming out on Peter Thiel, I think next month, by Max Chafkin of Bloomberg. I can't wait to read that. He obviously has enormous influence in, maybe not enormous influence in the Republican Party. It's probably an overstatement, but he has enormous influence in the Silicon Valley strain of the Republican Party. And Thiel has this kind of sprawling orbit of, people who absolutely worship the guy. His fingers are all over the place in the nonprofit world here. Thiel's a great character.
Two last questions.
Okay.
Any billionaires that you cover that that we don't hear maybe some of the good stories about outside of some of the ones that you mentioned?
Sure. So I get asked a lot who I admire or respect a lot.
Right.
I'll give you two names. One is Dustin Moskovitz. I don't know if he's someone who he gets some attention. So he's not totally beneath the radar. But Dustin Moskovitz and his wife Carrie Tuna are sort of the leading funders of the effective altruism movement. Dustin and Carrie run Open Philanthropy, which spends maybe $200-300 million a year on charitable enterprises. Obviously, we could have a whole other podcast about EA and the merits of effective altruism. But what I respect about Dustin and Carrie is, they're young, they're in their 30s, late 30s, and they're not trying to be everything to all people, right? They have a clear point of view, like it or hate it. This is what they're doing, and they're not trying to do tons of stuff. And I think it's well researched, well considered. Obviously, EA has trade-offs, but there's just no BS with them, which I guess I respect. Similarly, I also find, and this person is more beneath the radar, Patrick Collison to be very interesting, founder of Stripe. Stripe very well could be, I think it's worth something like $200 billion now. This is going to be a big company. Patrick Collison as the CEO and co-founder of Stripe. He's sort of EA aligned, I would say, but he is, I don't think he's an American citizen yet. He's Irish. But he's somebody who is very well respected among kind of the younger generation of rising rich people. And I think he could have a big influence in debates over housing policy. He's a big YIMBY. He's very interested in science and kind of ways to improve the scientific funding process. I find Patrick really interesting.
When is the Teddy Schleifer book coming out?
I'm writing a book in real time. It's called The Stratosphere. I don't know. I mean, I've always thought I would do something like that when the time was right or I had the right idea. But for now, I mean, for folks who are interested, yeah. So we're basically writing a book in real time, sort of, through just the daily work of journalism. So basically, Stratosphere is a newsletter, as Alex mentioned, but it's part of this bigger organization called Puck, which is launching around Labor Day. It's a subscription, membership-only news community. Folks can sign up and get access not just to me, but get access to as many as 10 other folks who write for the publication, and also cover things like Hollywood and DC and Wall Street. and write about some of the same themes about power, about ego, about influence, but kind of focused on other industries, right? I'm here in Silicon Valley. We have people who focus on Wall Street, on politics, on entertainment. But that launched around Labor Day. But in the meantime, if people go to the stratosphere.news, where I think there's a link alongside the podcast, I feel like I'm plugging a presidential campaign with my utterances of campaign website. Please donate today.
We're going to plug it. We're going to plug
there
it.
you go.
It's excellent.
No,
The Stratosphere is excellent journalism. And I really appreciate that because it is, you can tell you've done your research, you're an investigative journalism, and that is a rare thing these days. So I appreciate all the work that you do. Please do sign up for his newsletter, The Stratosphere. And when does Puck
Sure.
launch?
So the Stratosphere is free. You can get it for free. We've been doing it since around mid-June. But Puck launches around Labor Day, and that is not free, but I think it's worth it. But if you want to kind of get your feet wet this summer, the Stratosphere will give you a good sense of kind of the book we're writing in plain sight. So